So the aim of this video is to show how to create a population projection replicating the 2016 based population projection produced by National Records of Scotland for two areas, in this case Edinburgh and East Dunbartonshire. And in particular I'll be showing how to use POPGROUP's data modules in order to achieve this. So the data modules are a really useful feature of POPGROUP. They can contain a whole set of data on fertility, mortality, migration and trends in each of these components of change, as well as population data itself that are used by National Records of Scotland within their projections. So we'll be using POPGROUP's data modules function, which contains both pre-prepared data, but it also contains a setup file. And this setup file allows us to create a set of skeleton files, input files and output files that contain the projections that the National Records of Scotland produce, but also the assumptions that those projections rest on. And once we've produced those projections and assumptions, we can tweak them to represent or reflect different scenarios within particular areas. So the first step to produce these projections is to go into the data modules folder itself within the POPGROUP root of folders. And we'll see then 4 different folders. So these essentially allow us to produce projections of different characteristics. Projections of households, population, disability, and then finally labour force. So we're interested here in producing projections of population. So once we've opened the NRS 2016 POP folder, we can see 3 different items within that. The item in the middle is the one that we're interested in. This is the setup folder. So this allows us to specify our POPGROUP model. It allows us to say where our folders are going to be saved that are associated with that model. And it also allows us to define the areas that we are interested in producing projections for, to pull in the data for those areas. So if we click on the setup folder, we can see that folder here. And we need to add some information into this folder. So first we need to add a file header. So I'll just call this training. Then we need to give a model ID. So this is quite an important aspect of the setup folder. So we need to give it our folders a sensible name. So as we're producing projections for Edinburgh and East Dunbartonshire, I'll include a label that refers to both of those areas in my ID, and I'll also include 2016 to reflect that these are the 2016 based projections. Now I need to say where the model folders that are produced by the setup folder are going to be, or the setup file are going to be saved. So I need to say where on my computer are the projection model folders going to be stored, and I can pick anywhere on the computer. The way to do this is to double click on this cell and then navigate to the area of your computer's file system where you wish to save your files. So I'm going to pick the POPGROUP folder, and I can just click on OK once I've highlighted that folder, and you can see now that the path for the folder now appears in the cell. I also need to say where the data for the projection is stored, and this is stored within the data modules. I need to navigate to the appropriate place. So I'm going to go into the data modules folder, go into the population projections folder and into the data, and I can now click on OK. I now need to say where is my model setup file going to be saved. So this is the file that I'm actually working on now. So it makes sense to save this in the same place as I'm going to save the rest of the model folders associated with this population projection. So I'll pick the POPGROUP folder itself here, and then again click on OK. So I've completely filled out my setup folder now. I've given it a header. I've got a model ID that will be used to name the folders. I've said where the model folders associated with this projection are going to be saved, and I've indicated where the data modules are stored for this particular projection. So this contains the pre-prepared data that National Records of Scotland use in their projections. And finally, I've indicated where this setup file itself is going to be saved on my computer. So I can now click on Run. Now at this stage, an extra pop-up dialog box will appear, and I have to indicate which areas I'm interested in producing projections for. So rather than using all areas, I want to select a number of areas. And in fact, I want to pick two. So one is the city of Edinburgh, and then if I scroll down, the other is East Dunbartonshire. Then I need to give my areas labels. So both of these areas will be included in the projection. I need to give them labels to distinguish these areas. So the long label that I'll give is Edin East Dunbartonshire, or an abbreviation of those two areas. And I'll give a short label of total. So I can click on OK. And I'll then have a warning saying all workbooks will be closed without saving them. I can click OK here, safe in the knowledge that my original setup folder is going to be saved as part of the POPGROUP macros that are running. So after your setup file has run, you'll see a number of Excel folders that are left open. Five Excel files in total, which each show a different piece of information. So one of these is called Reports NRS 2016 Principle. And this is a really useful file that we'll look at in the next video, which allows you to explore and analyse the projections that you've produced. You'll see that all of the files that are produced have an ending of principle in their name, and that's because they all relate to the principal projection scenario produced by the National Records of Scotland, and I'll say a bit more about some of the other scenarios in later videos. So that's the reports folder. You'll also see a folder called Sum NRS 2016 Principle. And this essentially gives you a summary of the projections. And if we look at the tabs at the bottom of the folder, you can see we have a summary for the total, which is Edinburgh and East Dunbartonshire combined. And equally, we can look at the projections for Edinburgh and East Dunbartonshire in isolation. And you can see that we have the projections here by age and by year. And we can also look at the components of change in terms of birth, deaths and migration and so on. So a summary file containing information we might want to quickly look at in terms of the projections produced. Then we have a file called For NRS 2016 Principle. And if we scroll along to have a look at that folder, you can see that these contain the full forecasts. So here we have the full forecasts by single year of age and by sex for Edinburgh and East Dunbartonshire for each year of the projection. And you can see that we also, for all of these files, we have a note section which gives information on the projection itself. So here noting that this is based on a scenario that simply replicates the NRS 2016 based population projection using the principal scenario. We also have a file here called the dump file, which contains all of the information that was used in the projection in one big flat file. So we have all of the information on population counts, and if we scroll down, you can see that we also have all of the information on deaths and births and migration by single year of age and by sex. So a really useful file if you want to do some bespoke kind of analysis of the information within the projection. We also have a file called we also have a file that starts comp NRS 2016 Principle, and this file contains data on the components of change within our forecast. So if I select on the Edinburgh tab, we can look for information on births within the projection by the year. Within Edinburgh, we get useful information such as the total fertility rate that is implied by that data. We get information on the deaths, including useful demographic indicators such as the standardised mortality ratio, expectation of life at birth, and so on. And information on our final component of change, of course, migration, which here distinguishes both migration within the UK and migration overseas. So these are all the folders that are produced when you've run your setup file using the data modules. In the next video, I'll show you how to use the reporter Excel file to start exploring the projections and producing graphs of various population indicators and also the components of change themselves.